on tasting various Irish whiskies. Please.
Hi everybody. I think I know half the people in this room, so I'm going to keep this very conversational, if that's fine with you guys. Yeah, we're good? Before we begin, and I kick off and introduce myself and say how great I am, I wanted to ask you guys a question. On a scale of 0 to 1,000, what's your level of whiskey knowledge? Just yell out numbers. What's your level of whiskey knowledge? 1,000, of course it is. Yeah, no problem. Perfect. I think the rationale is that I would very, very rarely get a room full of the same answer. And not everybody in this room knows everything you know about whiskey, because the whiskey industry is constantly changing. So what I wanted to do today, instead of getting up and talking about how great I think my brand is, I wanted to talk a little bit about the ever-evolving whiskey category and approach it from a mindset of, I guess, removing the marketing of the whiskey industry. Talk a little bit about the influences that is possible in this growing whiskey category. The whiskey, as we know it today, we think of this kind of really old category with hundreds of years of provenance and history and stories. But the category itself and this idea of single malts really only goes back to the kind of 1970s and 1980s. And the category is evolving pretty rapidly. But a lot of the innovation that happened in whiskey was more about profitability than it was about flavour. And we're here at the Athens Bar Show constantly being bombarded with this growing craft spirits industry that's consistently changing. And the impact that almost every one of these brands out there can have on whiskey is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to be tasting 4 different whiskies. I'm not going to tell you what they are in advance. What I want you to do is give me your feedback. So share your tastings throughout. That's kind of the rationale. Normally I would do this blind, so we'd go through all 4, completely devoid of any kind of marketing material, any stereotypical notions of what you think the whiskey should taste like, and then we go back through them again and taste them, knowing what they are, and see if your tasting has changed. We don't have time to do that. We don't have a table to go through 8 different samples. So we're just going to go through them once. So I'll give you a little bit of lead-in as to kind of the rationale behind it. Make sense?
Yes.
Cool. That's a picture of me.
Wow.
My name's Rob. I'm the global brand ambassador of the Teeling Whiskey Company. Look, I'm super proud to be here and talking about whiskey. But yeah, like I said, you can always learn more about the whiskey industry and the whiskey category. It's constantly changing, constantly evolving. And yeah, there was a point in my career I knew nothing about whiskey. So with a small group like this, please, at any point, feel free to ask any questions or interrupt. Let's keep this conversational and unique. So, if I don't talk about Teeling, I don't get paid. So we'll talk a little bit about Teeling. So Teeling is a family-owned whiskey company from Dublin. So we started in 2012 with the new wave of Dublin producers. So Irish whiskey used to be the biggest whiskey category in the world in the 1800s. I don't know if you know, but a lot of it disappeared. And then during the downtime, Irish whiskey is sort of redefined. And globally, people still look at all Irish whiskey as one brand. I forget the name of that brand. But the success of Jameson had kind of redefined what Irish whiskey was. And today, in one of the fastest growing spirits categories in the world, we're seeing rapid development. And it's our job as craft whiskey producers to step away from that mold and showcase the length and breadth of flavour that is possible in Irish whiskey. So that's just a part of what I'm doing today. So showcasing the Teeling Whiskey Distillery. So it's the first new distillery in Dublin in 125 years. To give you an example, the first whiskey we released from this distillery broke the world record at the time for the most ever spent on a new distillery's whiskey. So one 3-year-old bottle of whiskey sold for 10,000 British sterling. So it's not a brag of how great the whiskey was. What it is a return to the rich distilling capital of Dublin. It's a piece of history. So there's a ton of interest in the Irish whiskey category. And that's relevant to whiskey because we think of whiskey as this, historic category mired in hundreds of years of provenance history. But the reason I bring it up, and the reason I bring up the Teeling Whiskey Distillery, is we almost fit into the modern new world of whiskey as well. So luckily, Irish whiskey plays on both sides of the coin of this evolving whiskey category, in that we have the history and the provenance, but with the history and the provenance comes rules and regulations. But this new world of whiskey has a lot more freedom, and that's where Irish whiskey plays as well. So we'll talk about that as we taste whiskies. But I need to talk about this gentleman. So this is Alex Chasko. He's our master distiller and master blender. It's a little bit about the rationale of how we go about making our whiskies. So Alex is American. He, like me, met an Irish girl, so now we're both trapped. But he grew up in America during the craft beer revolution. So anyone ever, seen the craft beer that happened in Portland, Oregon? Basically what was happening in America, there was Coors and Bud Light, and they kind of ruled the roost. But these craft brewers would read books about beers across continental Europe, and read about Weiss beer and Pilsner and all these interesting things. Like, we can make that. And we saw the craft beer revolution. A lot of experimentation and innovation happened in craft beer. He's trying to bring that same level of innovation that he's familiar with to Irish whiskey. So really pushing the boundaries of what is achievable in Irish whiskey. So looking at the breakdown of the whiskey making process. So you've got milling, malting, mashing, fermentation, distillation, maturation, blending, all these things that go into whiskey. But breaking it down, if you think about single malt, you're not talking about too many variables in single malt if you're using 100% malted barley. A lot of the time, when we talk about fermentation, we're using distiller's yeast because it converts sugar to alcohol at a high rate. So we don't talk about a variable at that point either. Sometimes we talk about the difference between double distillation and triple distillation in Ireland and Scotland, but we don't dig too deeply on it. Chill filtration we'll skip, but cask maturation is probably the biggest kind of variable that we see in whiskey today. The reason I bring it up is I once did a seminar at Tales and I pulled an article that's only about 3 years old from a Scotch Whisky magazine that said Scotch whisky can be aged in virgin oak, ex-bourbon, sherry, port, or even rum. That's a lot of variables. Teeling, we've used 150 different casks. So to give you an example of how impactful that is, so the Scotch Whisky Association wrote rules and regulations around what can and cannot be Scotch. And they were quite prescriptive because they didn't want other countries creating something called single malt Scotch. And they wrote this book called the Rules and Guidelines of Irish Whiskey, the Technical Files it's called. And my favourite line is that Scotch whisky has to be aged in oak casks that's only been influenced by this, and this. Very prescriptive. The Irish one says it has to be aged in wood. And that gives us a hell of a lot of freedom. It's not just the seasoned cask that I talked about outside, with all the different craft spirits and blending of craft spirits and flavours that are accessible in craft spirits that can be then barrel aged and then used to mature Irish whiskey. It paints a very broad spectrum of flavour that is possible in this new world of whiskey. And that's what we're touching on. So if we can throw out the first sample, we're going to dive right into the tasting. And that's pretty much my point. So just skipping over that for a second, I wanted to showcase basically the tasting that we're doing today. So like I said, I would normally do this tasting blind and you wouldn't have any information. But the key point is that you're about to taste 4 whiskies that are completely the same. So they're all this base whiskey. So like any good science experiment, if you're creating different variables, you need one constant. You need a control. This is our control. This is Teeling Small Batch. So it's our flagship product. We remake this blend every 18 months. It's our flagship product. It's most people's introduction to Teeling whiskey. So utilising this blend, anytime we get a new cask, as I mentioned, we've used over 150. Anytime we get a new cask, we start with this blend. So we know what that cask is bringing to the equation. And then we can use it like bitters or spices in cooking. We can use it as an element moving forward. And that's basically the process just within cask maturation. So like I said, we're about to taste 4 different whiskies. And our job today is guess what that influence is. Trying to showcase just how much variables. So when you get the whiskey, please nose, taste, jump in, and I'd like you to share your tasting notes. Please, by all means, share any tasting notes. Taste is subjective. There is no right answer. There is no wrong answer. Does anyone here not like cilantro or coriander? When you taste coriander, do you taste soap? Yeah, exactly. So coriander is the best example I can think of on a broad spectrum of how flavor is subjective. It's the same chemical compounds in coriander. Some people taste soap, some people taste lavender perfume, some people taste a Mexican food, and some people taste Asian food. But there's no differences, and there's no right or wrong answer. The same goes for whiskey. So if you're ever at a whiskey tasting, please share your tasting notes. Your tasting notes are subjective. They're based on the things that you've eaten, drinking throughout your lifetime, what they're quantified at, what language they're in. So there is no right or wrong answers. So I want to lean into what you might be getting. So I'm going to call on some of my friends in the audience. Alexandros, what are you getting here? Red fruits. Nice. Nice. Perfect. Hello. Thank you. For me, I think I might be a bit biased, but I remember grapefruit from this morning. But I think it's the 400 Palomas I've drunk this 3 days. But anyone else getting like citrus? A little bit of minerality? Melon maybe? Is anyone feeling confident they can guess what this is? Anyone got, Benji, do you have any tasting notes? Apple. Nice, that was quick and on the spot. Anyone over this side of the room have anything? You getting any particular tasting notes? I'll give you hints. It tastes like whiskey. Another favourite tasting note of mine are the more esoteric tasting notes that no one can call you out on, like it smells like my grandmother's front room during Christmas. It smells like a bale of hay. It smells like regret. A lot of people get that one, funnily enough. Yeah. Alright, so what do you think? So like I said, we're about to go through 4 of these, so I want to keep it short, sharp and snappy. Anyone hazard a guess? Anyone want to guess what this is? Obviously not the 4 people in the back of the room wearing the same t-shirt as me. Guys, what do you think? You look confident. No, not confident. Do you have any tasting notes? What about you? You can say something in Greek. And I'll pretend it's profound. Alright, so like I said, so this is a breakdown of our blend. So I need to talk about our blend and then we'll promise we'll go into 3 pretty short, sharp whiskeys straight after this. But Teeling Small Batch is made up of 3 parts grain, so roughly 3 barrels of corn-based whiskey to every 1 barrel of single malt from our Dublin distillery. So they're blended in roughly that ratio. For every single bottle of small batch, it's roughly that ratio, but it's not an exact science. The same way you create cocktails, the same way you cook at home, constantly changing and evolving. The more you make something, the more you make a cocktail, the more you make a dish at home, the more you get better at balancing the nuances of the spices and everything that go into that, the ingredients. The same goes for our whiskies. Constantly remaking, even our flagship products, means we get better at the balancing. So when people ask how old is Teeling Small Batch, we have to give a variable. It's between 4 to 6 years because every single cask of whiskey is going to be subtly different. We may have had a particularly warm summer in Ireland that year. We may have had a particularly cold winter that affects the casks. So we give a variable, but constantly remaking all of our different whiskies means we have a lot of confidence when it comes to creating whiskies. So when it comes to this whiskey, we take that blend, we take that rough ratio between 4 to 6 years in these ex-bourbon casks, and we moved it to a German Riesling cask. Do anyone have white wine on their bingo card? German white wine? You had it, we're 100% certain. Where was that confidence 5 minutes ago? So anyone has your tasting notes, tasting it again before you switch it out for the next one? Have your tasting notes changed at all? Now you know what that was? No, it still tastes like a grape, Chris? Yeah, thanks. Okay, well, let's dive into the next one. So we have another one, and I wanted to keep it rolling because the beauty of this particular tasting is knowing they're the same. The variable, and I hope I picked ones that are, quite unique and quite different, even side by side. Because, again, at the end of the day, there is so much impact just from the finishing cask. And going back to that slide earlier, all the variables on the whiskey making production line have an impact on whiskey if you put in the effort. But what we're doing today is just showcasing how much variation can come from that last step. So if every step in the process up until finishing cask was the same, what I try to achieve is noticing that each of these 4 whiskies are going to be dramatically different. Now if at the end of this you taste all 4 and they taste the same, don't share it because it will completely ruin my masterclass. But hopefully you'll see 4 dramatically different whiskies. So jump right into whiskey number 2 and let's see if we can narrow down. Now that you know the game, let's see if you can narrow down what cask you think this was matured in. Alright, those at the back of the room have got the next whiskey. Oh yeah, no, I picked that one. Oh, bourbon cask. Okay, we've got some questions there. So, a second for bourbon? Excellent. Perfect. Chris came up to tell me the order that I created. So the first was Riesling, and now we're starting to get the game. You're 1 whiskey deep, you're getting a bit more confident. Mr. Coriander, what do you think? I'm sorry to call you out like that. Cinnamon, yes, okay. So cinnamon is a great one for wood spice. If you see whiskey tastings and they say wood spice, that is very broad. Cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, coconut, pimento. There's a lot of wood spice out there, but cinnamon is definitely an element of ex-bourbon casks, like vanilla would be. Vanilla, key component. Anyone else want to guess this one? Yes. Sorry? Butter? Yes, definitely butter. So you're getting, so these are also non-chill filtered whiskies, I should mention, so there is a higher fat content. So you're definitely going to get a little bit of dairy-like consistency in this particular whiskey, Tinley whiskey. Is a non-chill filtered whiskey. As we know, in the food industry and the perfume industry, the biggest carriers of flavour in the world is fat and alcohol. So if you have a craft spirit that is non-chill filtered and has a higher fat content, with a higher ABV, there is a fairly good chance that you're going to have quite an impactful spirit on your hands. So definitely something that we take into consideration with Tinley whiskey. So we have a few tasting notes. Anyone else want to hazard a guess what they're getting here? Sorry. Caramel. Definitely caramel. Yeah, that's a good one. Caramel, butterscotch, toffee, honeycomb, that deep brown spice and sweetness that we associate with whiskey is, definitely quite prominent in a lot of aged whiskies for sure. Anyone getting a heavy vanilla? What about a bit rarer? Figs, apricots, dates? Yeah, a few heads nodding now. So the reason I asked you to share your tasting notes is the more I do these, the more I realise that if you prompt people with answers, the heads start to roll. Like, oh, that is what it is. Because we've all been there, we're all tasting something, like, I don't know how to quite quantify that. The beautiful thing about you sharing as well as me sharing is people either disagree or agree, and you're helping people build out their palates and their tasting notes. Again, feel free to share, because people will either agree with you, or based on your look, they might not agree with you, or might disagree with you. But at least then, your brain is working on autopilot, and it offers a solution, and offers a tasting note, like, oh, it's not peach, it's apricot. But then our ego gets in the way, and we don't yell that out, because we're afraid that the guy with the microphone is going to point and laugh. That's not going to happen today, at least. Maybe tomorrow. Alright, so how are we doing on whiskey number 3? Are we good? Okay, they're just setting up whiskey number 3, so I don't want to give away the game. So anyone else have any last minute guesses on what whiskey number 2 is? Really good aftertaste. Coffee. So did you come to the Teeling stand today? Did you come to the Teeling stand today? So we have a Teeling stand at the front of the whiskey show, the bar show, in between Bacardi and Patron, and you might have had the Teeling frozen Irish coffee. So you might be picking up coffee from this particular whiskey, maybe influenced by the particular cocktail that you had at our stand. But yeah, certainly there is coffee, dark chocolates, maybe pimento. Leather is a good one for whiskey. Alright, so I saw one guy at the back of the room say the words rum. Anyone disagree this is a rum cask? A few people already nodding. No, not a rum? Okay.
The third one?
No, we haven't got the third one yet. This is not number 2. Okay, so you're still on bourbon? You're still bourbon? That's wrong. I know what it is. Alright, so I guess just to reinforce that our taste buds, our idea of taste is generally kind of guided by the things that we see, not only the things that we taste. So one person in the back of the room is saying rum, one person is still saying bourbon. Just a quick show of hands before whiskey number 3 comes out. Who agrees with rum? Who agrees with bourbon? 50-50. Alright, well, that was rum. So that is Teeling Small Batch. That's our flagship product. So showcasing even an innovative tasting with whiskies that aren't available in Greece. Our core range fits right in and can, trick people in some respects. A lot of people probably have tried Teeling before, but alongside these weird and wonderful spirits, it does really showcase just how innovative Teeling Small Batch can be. So it's a rum cask finish. I won't say where we got the rum cask from, but we do have a pretty good relationship with the biggest family-owned rum company in the world. I didn't say that. Alright, so that's Teeling Small Batch. So a rum finish. So you've tried the Riesling finish and a rum finish. Now everyone's palate is warmed up. Everyone really understands the game now. Are we ready for whiskey number 3? I was going to say, I'm just looking at you, Benji. Just staring. Are you ready for whiskey number 3? Oh, I want to go home. Alright, so whiskey number 3 is coming around. Is this number 3? Sherry. Okay, now we're getting rolling. Sherry, Alexandros, you don't have it yet. Should I tell you what the order was? I don't remember. What do you think? Sherry as well, okay. A lot of people leaning towards sherry. What do you guys? Banana bread cask. Alright, I'm gonna go home. What do you think, guys? It's a bit different, isn't it? We're 3 whiskeys in. Would anyone agree that these are all the same whiskey? No. Very different. Okay, perfect. Good. If you said yes, then I wouldn't have had to go home. What do you think? No? Alright. Any other last tasters? What do you think? Port? Okay, so we seem to be going down the fortified wine route. So we have sherry, we have port, both being fortified wines from a particular area of the Mediterranean, made from grape-based products. So are we all leaning towards that direction, or has anyone else got a particularly weird and wonderful solution that they want to put forward for this whiskey? What do we think? So you might be getting a little bit of the same flavours across. So going back to the base whiskey, so you've got 3 parts corn, so you're going to get that sweetness we talked about, vanilla, butterscotch, toffee, caramel. Irish single malts. Irish malts tend to be a little bit more orchard fruit forward, apples, peaches, and pears, things like that. But from what I remember in this one, the sweetness on this one I think is a little bit more earthy, like honey. Anyone agree with that? Like almost like an earthy kind of dirt-like sweetness, maybe? What about if I said agave? Anyone want to guess what this one could be? What do you think? So, anyone agree with the agave-based sweetness now and guessing where this particular tequila cask is from? Alright, so yes, whiskey number 3, again, same base spirit. But instead of going into Riesling cask, instead of going into a rum cask, this has gone into a tequila cask. Tequila cask, yeah. So quite interesting. Anyone pick that one? Did you pick that one? Oh, you didn't get it yet. Great. You had it? Oh, all three of you had it. You didn't realize it? I mean, exactly. Anyone else tasting notes change now you know what it was? I mean, obviously not you guys that got it right, but what do you think? Did it change? Yeah, so the comments there, really refreshing, quite interesting, probably coming from the tequila cask. So again, I won't mention where the particular tequila cask come from, but again, if you come back to our stand, you might be able to guess pretty easily. So definitely come by the Teeling stand down there at the front of the show, grab yourself a frozen Irish coffee, maybe have a whiskey or two. Sorry? It is really nice, yeah. Really nice. A testament to the skill of the blending. Again, once you've made these, like this is not a box ticking exercise. This is not designed to create a tequila flavored Irish whiskey. It's not designed to create a rum flavored whiskey. It's about utilizing these elements moving forward in the blending process. So the same way that you use bitters in cocktail creation, knowing the two dashes can completely transform an old-fashioned or a Manhattan, it's utilizing them in the right way moving forward. Imagine, I'm assuming most people are bartenders in this room, but imagine you're creating cocktails and you're told you can't use grape-based ingredients in making cocktails. You feel somewhat hamstrung. And that's the modern whiskey industry. You know, we're not being defined anymore by flavor DNA or production practices that focus more on yield. There's a wide world of flavor out there in the whiskey industry, and it is there to be explored. It's there to be discovered, and we're starting to see more and more craft spirits realizing this and setting them apart. I'll give you an example. I wish I was able to bring this film, but everyone remember 2012 when barrel-aged cocktails became a thing? So again, that same concept can be applied to whiskey. So we did a barrel-aged cocktail finished Negroni. A barrel-aged Negroni finished Irish whiskey for Manhattan Bar in Singapore. So reached out to them and said, you do barrel-aged Negronis. If we ship you casks, you barrel-aged Negroni, ship them back to us, and we can create a Negroni finished Irish whiskey. That is just a small sample of just how much you can really stretch the idea of Irish whiskey. Think about a Boulevardier with a Negroni barrel finish to it. So again, it just scratches the surface. We can go with number 5 if you're ready as well. And number 4. I've had too much to drink. I haven't drunk anything. Thanks. So yeah, we have one last whiskey. And again, I wanted to reinforce, going back to this slide here. So today we're just focusing on that last few months of maturation of whiskey. So for 4 to 6 years, all 4 of these whiskies were the same thing. They tasted the same for all intents and purposes, were the same Teeling small batch, but it showcases that last 20% of the life cycle of whiskey can go in remarkably different directions. And you can start to change these variables out in this ever-growing world of whiskey when we start to approach raw materials like we approach coffee and craft beer. And we start to introduce the thousands of yeast strains that are present in cooking and kombucha and kimchi. And we start to convert our grain-based sugar into a myriad of flavors. So there is a wild world of flavor variation out there in whiskey, and Irish whiskey, luckily, is one of the few categories that really get to explore that and still be named Irish whiskey. All right, how's whiskey number 4? Anyone getting something weird here?
Yes.
Yeah, I purposely saved this one to last. How would you quantify this?
The weird smelling aroma is clove. Cola, clove.
Cola. I like that one. So the weird aroma. Glue. Glue. Much less positive, but still correct. Yes. Alcohol. Oh, agricole. Okay, yeah, that's a bit better. Yeah, bit of funkiness there. So I'll give you an example of tasting notes that I've heard previously. So one of my favorite ones for this one was "It's like licking a grand piano." Anyone else licked a grand piano recently? My favorite one though is carrot cake. Is anyone getting, American style carrot cake? A few people shaking their heads. Yeah? Anyone? No. Got wrong. Anything else to add? Cumin? Floral and sweet, yeah? Yes. Yeah, I like those. Yeah, green tea, matcha, white, yes. Tonka, that's a great one. We'll come back to that. Cardamom, for sure. So, we'll go back to Tonka for a second, and here's an interesting one. So, I won't give away the ghost. I want you to still kind of taste this one because I do think it's really unique. But Tonka's an interesting one because everyone remember that bartenders started using too much Tonka and it started poisoning people. There's a chemical compound called coumarin in Tonka bean that people needed to be aware of. The same thing is in some wooden casks. So definitely something you need to take into consideration when maturing whiskey. Something that you need to be aware of. There is chemical compounds in whiskey that are released as flavours that can appear when licking a grand piano or glue or matcha tea. Anyone else have any particular tasting notes for this one before we let the cat out of the bag? Nikos? Caramel? I didn't hear what you said, so I'm going to make up what you said. He said caramel and cardamom and Christmas cake. Yeah? Yeah.
Aquavit.
Aquavit. That's an interesting one. Yeah, there is a bit more caraway, dill, these kind of flavours that you'll see in Scandinavian spirits that differ from Norway and Sweden. But yeah, there's definitely that kind of botanical kind of nose that could be, somewhere between Aquavit or Genever or something like that. Yeah. All right. Yes.
The long pepper. I don't know how it's called.
The long pepper. Like chilies?
Not pepper. Pepper. Macricoco.
Anyone want to help me with the translation of that one?
It's a pepper.
It's a pepper, okay.
Pepper from long.
It's a pepper with long. So for the Greek guys in the room, do you agree with this? Did we get some of that? Yeah, a few people nodding their heads. Alright, so I cheated on this one. So what we did for the first three was we talked about seasoning. So again, the inception was to kind of accept that you might be tasting another seasoned cask. But what I wanted to do was open up the different spectrum of wood types. So this isn't a seasoned cask, it's a virgin cask that hasn't been used for any other craft spirits out there. This is a completely different type of wood that is distinct from oak. Oak is the most common cask used in the whiskey industry because it contains whiskey very well. You don't lose too much to angel share over the years, which is why everyone uses oak in wine and spirits. But there's tons of different woods out there, like chestnut, acacia, and all these different wood types, but each come with their positives and negatives. Chestnut, for example, you can lose 10% of your whiskey every year. So you're probably not going to get a 40-year-old whiskey that's been in a chestnut cask. So that's the downside. The plus side is that the particular butter notes that we got earlier are far more pronounced in a chestnut cask. So there's pluses and minuses with these. Hello. I'm still as confused as I was before. Where was I? So yeah, the downsides and pluses, it's not just as easy as swapping a cask in and out. And the reason I say this was Tonka bean. So as much as I give the man shit talking about something I've never heard of before, Tonka bean was the best equivalent here because this was aged in an Amburana cask. Some Someone picked it, but didn't verbalize it, so it doesn't count. So Amburana is a Brazilian hardwood. So it is a good container of alcohol, and it does provide a quite dramatically different flavour, but the downside of this one is that it has higher levels of coumarin that can be influenced in the whiskey. So you need to take an extra step during maturation to test for coumarin, like using tonka bean in an appropriate manner in a bar. So yeah, that's just a small example of some of the different whiskies that are achievable. And like, yes? No, because then you can just water it down with other whiskey and bring down those levels. So the same with ABV. You got an ABV cask strength 66, add water, it dramatically brings down the ABV. You test for high levels of coumarin, add something that doesn't have a high level of coumarin, so you're diluting it across larger amounts of bottles of whiskey, and that brings down your levels. So yeah, no, you wouldn't throw it away. Alright, so anyone here disagree that these were 4 completely different whiskies? So dramatically different whiskies. We had the same base whiskey, Teeling small batch, aged in each of these casks. So that last 20% maturation process can have this huge impact. What if we were then to multiply that by 150 different times? Like we said, a Teeling whiskey, in a world where people still look at Irish whiskies as one brand, it's our job as craft whiskey producers to focus on the flavour, to focus on the future of the category, and really kind of test the boundaries. Because that's why we're all here, right? We're not here to taste something we've had a million times before. We're here to find out what's happening in the industry, what's new, what's exciting, what's different. How do we set ourselves up as bartenders? How do we set ourselves up as bars? What's our unique selling point as bartenders? What's our unique selling point as bars? As people in this growing category, finding out what's new, finding out what's different, and then testing the boundaries and pushing everything forward. So that's how Teeling whiskey really kind of approaches the future of Irish whiskey. So hopefully you had a bit of crack with this tasting. Please come by the stand and try our peated whiskey, our grain whiskey, our single pot still whiskey, try an Irish coffee. And yeah, thanks for coming by the masterclass. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope to see you guys next time. Do we have time for questions? Probably not. Do you have a question? Sorry? So the one in the middle there, our flagship product, was whiskey number 2. Yeah. I always try and include it because, again, you know, people approach the flagship product and they sense that, oh, I tried that before. But we want people to revisit it. It's just by the way we make our products. Constantly remaking it means we're constantly getting better at it. So always trying to include our core range products to guys give you a different lens and a different viewpoint of our flagship products. So you're asking, are all Irish whiskies finished in ex-bourbon casks? It is the most common. So ex-bourbon casks are the most common in the whiskey industry globally because America uses their cask once and then they're null and void after that for the US bourbon industry. So they come to Ireland and Scotland and Europe for the wine industry. So they are most definitely the most common casks in the world. And that was cost-based. Like I said before, a lot of the whiskey industry has evolved over time through cost measures and profitability and things like that, yield. So your ex-bourbon cask, to give you an example, your ex-bourbon cask used to cost around 80, 90 euro per barrel, whereas some of the more rarer casks that we tried today can cost all the way up to $5,000 for an empty barrel that's never been used before. So yeah, as a fledgling company, you want to focus more on the cost-saving measures. But because of the impact of the bourbon cask, those prices are starting to rise, and we're starting to see a venture into wine, spirits, rums, fortified wines, and a little bit more of a lesser reliance on ex-bourbon casks. But yeah, to answer your question, ex-bourbon was the most common for many, many, many years.
Yeah, two questions. So if your flagship is number 2, could you remind us what was number 1, the common product that you use in every single bottling?
Yes, of course. So the question here, if number 2 was our flagship product, what was number 1? So that's why I have this slide here. So all of them were this base blend. So 3 parts of corn, 1 part of barley, aged separately in ex-bourbon casks before being married in each of the casks. So number 1 was this in German Riesling for 6 to 18 months. Number 2 is the rum. Number 3 was the tequila. And number 4 was Amarante. Yeah, Brazilian hardwood.
And question number 2, is it possible to get the last 2? You have bottlings for the last 2, or this is just...
There's a little bit left. They're not available in Greece. Like I said, I want to talk less about things that were available, less about a brand chat, more about your education on whiskey. So I did bring these in from Dublin. They are only available in Dublin, but there's a few bottles left. So please join us at the stand. I'll hide them under the counter, so the only people that know about them are you guys in the room here. So join us at the tilling stand and we'll make sure we put a hole in that bottle. Any last one? Yes? These ones, yes, but we've finished for like 7 years. So finishing is a question that is similar to the how long is a piece of string. This idea of finishing historically was only like 6 months, 12 months, and it was a good way to kind of add an element of uniqueness to a whiskey. But whiskey industry, not just dealing with whiskey, craft whiskey producers are now pushing that boundary right out, and we're starting to see multiple aging. This idea, so like a bourbon cask that's only ever had bourbon and rum is then called a rum cask, and regardless of age, because rum is so impactful. And that was the way the barreling kind of worked. But nowadays, there's so much chopping and changing and moving around, it's more about the story of that cask. You get whiskey that's been in bourbon, and then Irish whiskey, then beer, a red ale, then back to Irish whiskey, then a porter, and then back to Irish whiskey. So there's a lot of movement around. And this finishing can be 6 months or it will be 7 years. And it's, I think it brings up a good point of, the whiskey, some of the experimental guys that are trying to fast forward the aging process. And this will be my last point, but, there's, good examples of very innovative guys testing the boundaries of science with something called ultrasound aging or vatting wood chips inside whiskey to try and fast forward to this ultra age state at like 40 years old. And I think that negates the beauty of a blender in whiskey, because the question has to be asked, if you're fast forwarding a 40-year-old, what if that whiskey was perfect at 32 years, 7 months and 3 days? You don't know because you fast forwarded straight past it. And that really summarizes the beauty of a blender and the romance of the whiskey industry. That sometimes you create something that will outlive you, and it's someone else's job to bring through to fruition. Some of the things that we're doing today, will outlive us all, and that is the beauty of the whiskey industry. So, guys, thanks for coming.